What if the old dishwasher you always overlooked at that rundown diner turned out to be the only reason the entire place hadn't collapsed? Walter Brooks, 76 years old, a quiet man who lives in a decaying garage and has washed dishes nonstop for the past 7 years. No one ever asked how he was doing. No one knew he used his own money to help customers. And then, he was accused of stealing. But what no one saw coming was that he wasn't just anyone. And the person watching it all unfold was the millionaire owner of the entire restaurant chain. From being humiliated to turning the tables, from invisible to becoming the symbol that transformed the company's culture. This isn't just an emotional story, it's proof that kindness is the only language. That needs no translation. If you believe in justice, in human dignity, and want to witness an ending that will give you goosebumps, watch until the very last second. And if this is your first time on the channel, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a story that moves your soul about fairness, humanity, and the quiet power of kindness. The midday sun beat down on the sun-bleached metal roofs of Eastside Austin, Texas, where old-school diners still clung to their 1980s menus, despite having changed owners at least 3 times. But tucked among barber shops, laundromats, and worn-down pawn shops, one neon sign still glowed, its bold red letters trimmed in gold. The Junction Grill, since 2008, a restaurant once dubbed resurrected from the grease trap, and the man who built it was now standing across the street. Jack Donovan squinted at the sign like it was a relic from another life, as if it were daring him to remember who he used to be when he worked the line 15 years ago. He wore a weathered baseball cap, its frayed brim a surviving piece of his late wife's memory. Not for style, more like a ritual or a silent vow. If this place ever loses its soul, I'll come back, but not in a tie. Today he kept that promise. The glass door opened with a familiar jingle, so familiar it lived in his bones. No one in the diner looked up. Not a single glance registered the man in a faded flannel shirt, worn-down jeans, and a scruffy 3-day beard, as Jack Donovan, CEO of the Junction Grill restaurant chain. The same man Forbes once dubbed the guy who turned sandwiches into an empire. He sat at the first stool near the wall, right beneath the hand-stitched leather map of Texas he'd sewn himself when he opened his very first restaurant. It wasn't just a seat, it was a vantage point. From here, he could watch everything: the cashier's counter, the open kitchen, the back door, and most importantly, how the staff treated each other, the customers, and the so-called junction culture. Jack wasn't here to judge the grilled chicken sandwich or the signature spicy honey glaze. He knew the recipe hadn't changed, but something else had. In the past few months, something was off. Customer numbers held steady, online ratings still sat at 4.7 out of 5, but net profits had dipped. And, most alarming of all, the staff turnover rate had spiked, especially during the night shift. One regional manager had whispered, "There's something weird going on at that branch, but no one wants to talk." Jack didn't trust rumors. He trusted facts, and facts don't live in boardrooms. "What can I get you?" a woman's voice called out, not exactly rude, but far from warm. Jack looked up. The woman behind the counter had platinum blonde hair curled at the ends. Her name tag read, Chelsea. She didn't meet his eyes. "Grilled chicken sandwich, light on mayo, black coffee." Chelsea jotted down the order, typed into the register. Jack handed over a $20 bill. Only then did she look at him, her gaze brief, like someone checking a parking stub. "That seat's Glenn's," she said, half teasing. "He gets grumpy if someone takes it." Jack smiled faintly. He remembered Glenn, the retired teacher who told war stories to neighborhood kids, who once suggested adding his mom's beef stew to the menu. "I'll clear out before he shows," Jack replied, subtly roughening his voice. He wasn't pretending. He was listening. Every line spoken, every attitude on display, the way crises were handled, the way tough customers were treated, all of it was real-time data, more telling than any spreadsheet. It was lunch rush hour. The kitchen clanged with the sizzle of hot pans, shouted orders, the non-stop swipe of credit card machines. But amidst the chaos, Jack's eyes caught a rhythm that stood out from the rest. At the back of the kitchen, an elderly man was washing dishes. He wasn't fast, but he was precise. He didn't just clean plates, he inspected every drip, stacked them by size, and occasionally smiled back through the kitchen window when a regular waved. His apron was soaked but tidy, like cleanliness was a matter of personal pride. His name was Walter Brooks. Jack had reviewed his employee file. He'd always wondered why a man who used to be an engineer at a machine plant would be washing dishes at 76. Now he was beginning to understand, at least partly. As Jack sipped his coffee, he overheard a hushed conversation between Chelsea and a tall, lanky male cashier with highlighted hair. His name tag read, Zane. "Walter still hasn't clocked out?" Zane muttered, stifling a laugh. Chelsea scoffed. "He lives somewhere behind the lot, in that old pickup. Used to be an engineer. Now he scrubs plates to survive. Pretty tragic." Zane snorted. "Bet he cuddles dish rags to keep warm at night." They both chuckled. Jack's grip on his mug tightened. Not out of outrage, but familiarity. That kind of quiet mockery was what eroded decency. No yelling, no slurs, just a slow drip of poison into the culture he'd spent 15 years building. Walter kept working. When a kid spilled a tray of water, Walter was the first with a towel. When an elderly man wobbled through the back entrance, Walter was there to steady him, unnoticed. And when a young Latina mother returned with her baby in one arm and panic in her eyes, searching for a missing wallet, it was Walter who silently pulled a few bills from his pocket and handed them to Chelsea, without saying a word. "Third time this week," Zane mumbled, just loud enough for Jack to hear. "What's he trying to do, start his own charity?" Chelsea shrugged. "Maybe he thinks he's Saint Mary, with a beard." Jack set his mug down. His chest felt frozen. He didn't know everything yet, but he knew enough to realize something was deeply wrong here. And if he was going to fix it, not just this store, but the spirit the Junction Grill was founded on, he'd have to start at the bottom. Not as the CEO, but as the one who listens from the ground up. That day, Jack left the diner as the sun dipped low, but his heart was heating up, not from the coffee, but from a storm on the horizon. And this time, the man in the kitchen would be leading the charge. If there's one place in a restaurant where light never reaches, it's the dishwashing station. Separated by a soft rubber curtain, wedged between the storeroom and the steamy kitchen, it's a world with no customer laughter, no shouted orders, just the sound of running water, clinking plates, and the faint sting of lemon-scented chemicals mixed with the smell of time itself. That's where Walter Brooks had worked for the past 7 years. No one really remembered the exact day he started, not even him. He didn't walk into the diner because he needed a job. He walked in because he needed a reason to keep going. Walter had once been a senior mechanical engineer at a parts manufacturing company in Dallas. His wife, Marianne, was a school librarian, the kind who handwrote birthday cards for every student she ever taught. They had spent over 40 years in a small house on Maple Street, where bougainvillea bloomed along the white picket fence, and come every December, they strung up colorful lights along the porch. But cancer doesn't care about seasons. It came like a cold wind, sweeping away everything the two had built. Insurance couldn't keep up. Treatments dragged on. Walter sold the house, the car, the furniture, and moved into a relative's garage until that relative passed away and the property was locked up. Since then, he'd lived in that same crumbling garage as if it were a temporary stop he could never leave. He worked during the day, snuck in instant noodles at night, and washed his face each morning with cold water caught from a rain gutter. He never complained, never told his story. To him, survival was a form of responsibility. At the Junction Grill, Walter was a kitchen shadow, always there before anyone else arrived, and still there long after the lights went out. During Jack Donovan's 3 days in disguise, he noticed something no HR report had ever captured. Walter had never once clocked out on time. That day's lunch shift dragged longer than usual due to a POS system glitch that threw the front counter into chaos. While Chelsea and Zane argued over whose fault it was, Walter simply continued his rhythm, stacking dishes, wiping drawer handles, inspecting each heat tray, without being asked. That's when Jack noticed something that made him pause: the staff bulletin board. Gone were the dull sticky notes and the tasteless memes. In the bottom corner, taped on with old Scotch tape, was a handwritten note. Today you get to choose. Be the person who drains others or the one who lifts them. Walter. Jack looked around. No one seemed to notice the note, but he saw a young brown-skinned waitress, around 20, quietly remove the old message and tuck it into her wallet. In its place, she pinned a new one. People may forget the meal, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Walter didn't write these to be praised. He wrote them like others water their plants every morning, not expecting them to bloom, just hoping the roots won't die. When a boy with a mobility disorder dropped a glass of water, his mother panicked, flustered, and red-faced. Chelsea sighed loudly in annoyance, but Walter stepped forward, mopped the floor without a word, and looked the boy in the eyes. I once fell face first into an ice bucket at your age. Not my proudest moment. The boy laughed. His mother stared at Walter with surprise and gratitude. Zane walked past muttering, "Old man thinks he's some kind of superhero." Jack didn't need to turn around to know who said it, but he didn't respond. What mattered wasn't in the loud voices, it was in the small details of how people behave when no one is watching. That afternoon, Jack sat beside a regular, Mr. Glenn, the same retired teacher who once pushed for adding smoked chicken chili to the 2012 menu. They sat in silence for a few minutes before Jack spoke, keeping the voice of a stranger. The dishwasher, who is he? Glenn followed his gaze. Walter Brooks, best man this town ever had, and the one no one's willing to admit it. He lives alone? Glenn nodded. Lost his wife 5 years ago. He and Mary Ann were the old-school love letter type. When she got sick, he sold everything. After she passed, he came here asking for work. No one else would take him. Who hires a 70-year-old with a bad back and no restaurant experience? But he didn't ask for money? Nope. Refused it. Pays off his wife's medical bills himself. Sends money to the hospital in Dallas every month, even if it's just a couple hundred. Like it's a promise to her he's still keeping. Jack said nothing. The question now in his head wasn't about labor efficiency. It was a much deeper one. How did a man like that end up being seen as a burden? And the answer wasn't in Walter. It was in the people around him, those who could speak about a kind soul as if he were just another stain to scrub away. That evening, Jack didn't return to the hotel. He stayed in the parking lot. Around 10 p.m., Walter finally emerged from the back door, shoulders slumped, apron soaked from dishwater. He didn't lock the door with a key, just looped an old cable tie through the handle. Jack followed quietly, not to investigate, but to understand. Walter drove a rusted 1993 Ford Bronco, tilting slightly to one side. He drove slowly, not from age but because the engine stuttered with each block. After a short trip through an abandoned industrial area, the truck turned down a narrow alley behind a construction dump site and stopped in front of a collapsing garage. Jack parked far away and turned off his lights. Walter pushed open the garage, struggling with a stuck panel. A yellowed bulb flickered on, bright enough for Jack to see. A folding cot, plastic buckets, a hot plate, and, curled in the corner, a gray cat on a blanket. Whiskey. Walter gently stroked the cat's back, poured water into a bowl, sat on a plastic chair, opened a can of tuna, shared half with whiskey, ate the other half himself. Jack looked away, not out of pity, but shame. He had thought he understood the company's culture, but he had drifted too far, too long to realize men like Walter still existed. Lived, fought, without asking for anything but a little respect. That night didn't end with an explosion, no big revelation. It ended with Jack staring long and hard at the handwritten note pinned to his own dashboard, written years ago by his late wife. Lead from the bottom up, not the top down. Tomorrow Jack knew he would return, not just to observe anymore, but to start pulling back the curtain on whatever was rotting beneath the surface, no matter how polished it looked. The next morning, wind swept through Austin. Pale golden sunlight streamed through the window of the Junction Grill. Scattering across the faded tiled floor, Jack Donovan had once polished by hand on opening day. The diner looked like it had shed the night's weariness and dressed itself in morning light. But Jack knew better. What looks the purest often hides the darkest truths. He returned, still wearing the same frayed flannel and old cap. No one suspected a thing. The young morning crew had no idea the quiet man seated in the far corner was the founder of the very place they worked. And that was exactly what Jack needed. Invisibility to see everything clearly. Walter was already there. Same faded blue shirt, same carefully tied apron, back slightly hunched, but footsteps steady. He greeted each person who passed, not with words but with familiar nods and kind eyes. Few returned the gesture. Jack noticed. Walter never sat down. From the moment his shift started to the moment break time came, he stood, washing, wiping, gathering trays, catching servers before they tripped. No one asked him to. He chose to. Chelsea was different. She showed up 7 minutes late, latte in hand, one earbud in. Zane wasn't far behind, plopping onto a counter stool and immediately scrolling on his phone. In front of them, a long line of customers waited to pay. But no one hurried. No one cared. They weren't afraid of being held accountable. Jack ordered coffee. This time it was brought out by Ben, a young cook who had only been working there for 3 months. There was something uneasy in Ben's expression. "You okay?" Jack asked gently. Ben nodded, then glanced around. "You don't look like a regular." Jack smiled. "Why's that?" Ben lowered his voice. "Because you watch. Regular customers don't stare at the dish pit that long." That comment gave Jack pause. Ben had noticed, which meant not everyone was blind. Jack nudged the conversation. "That older guy back there, he all right?" Ben glanced toward Walter, his expression unreadable. "He taught me how to hold a knife properly, back when I nearly cut my hand on my first day. No one else showed me anything. Only him." "What about Chelsea and Zane?" Ben didn't answer, but his eyes said everything. Something worse is happening. As the morning shift thinned out and the diner grew quieter, Jack opened a newspaper, concealing a small phone already set to record. Not to accuse, but to remember. Every word, every breath. Chelsea and Zane launched into their routine. They spoke louder than usual, as if they wanted to be overheard, by someone they assumed wasn't listening. Zane began, voice dripping with sarcasm. "You know, I checked the files yesterday. Walter's been here. 7 years. 7 years of scrubbing dishes." "Pathetic." Chelsea burst out laughing. "Even worse, he lives in a garage out behind some industrial park. No power, no water. Ben says he goes home every night to a stray cat." Zane chuckled darkly. "What's the cat's name again?" "Whiskey?" "God. Poor and poetic." "Gross." Chelsea. "It's hilarious. Imagine him cuddling a cat at night, shivering, reeking of leftover fish." Jack didn't flinch, but his blood simmered, not because of the cruelty, but because of how casually cruel it was. Then came the moment that crossed the line. "Patricia's starting to notice the cash shortages at the register," Chelsea said quietly. "But she's never named names." "That's when we move," Zane clicked his tongue. "Henry's an easy target. Everyone sees him lingering by the counter when stuff goes missing. If it happens a few more times, with him standing nearby, easy case." Chelsea nodded. "All we need to do is help the drawer come up short a little more, then accidentally let Patricia catch him nearby. Boom, perfect setup." Zane smirked. "Once he's gone, my cousin slides in. He's faster, younger. Plus I get the referral bonus." "Split it?" Chelsea. 60-40. I'm the one with the driver's license." They both laughed. Jack set his cup down, silently. But in his heart, a decision had been made. This was no longer about management. This was about morality. That afternoon, Tanya Rivera, the single mom Jack had quietly reached out to beforehand, walked in with her daughter Luna. She wore a thin jacket and faded jeans, but her eyes were bright. Luna sat quietly, nodding a thank you when given water. Jack didn't signal anything. Chelsea slid into character all on her own. When Tanya approached the register and forgot her wallet, Chelsea announced loudly, "Walter, we've got another rescue case." The room hushed. A few diners turned their heads. Walter emerged, calm as ever. "How much do you need?" he asked. Tanya feigned a nervous tone. "Just $13. Walter didn't ask why. He pulled out a 20, placed it on the counter. "Keep the change. Buy the little one a book she'll love." Chelsea didn't thank him. She merely glanced at Zane and muttered, "Mark that down. 13 plus 22 from the other day. That's 35. Zane nodded. 20 more and the trap's ready. Jack heard every word, recorded every syllable, and now he knew. Tomorrow would be the day of reckoning. He wasn't just a CEO. He would be a witness, a voice for truth, and the only one with enough power to turn the tide without raising his voice. Walter Brooks left the diner at 9:38 p.m. By then, the place was nearly empty, just a few customers lingering over coffee or typing quietly on their laptops. Jack Donovan remained longer than usual, coat on, head low, but his eyes never left the back door. Walter didn't carry much, just a small canvas bag holding a few old hand towels, a yellowed notebook, and a cheap bag of cat food. He waved goodbye to someone in the kitchen, probably Ben, and quietly disappeared into the rear parking lot. The 1993 Ford Bronco was already there, tail light hanging half broken, paint flaking so badly the hood revealed patches of rusted metal. Jack had noticed the car on day one, but only now did he know for sure it belonged to Walter. No headlights, no engine rev. Walter drove as if gliding through the night, careful not to wake some memory that might still be sleeping. Jack started his own engine and followed, far enough not to be seen, close enough not to lose him. Walter didn't head toward the residential area like the others. He turned off down a deserted industrial road, past the old warehouse district. The streetlights flickered weakly. Most of the road was lined with wild grass, abandoned semi-trailers, and rusted-out signs. By night, this place echoed only with the wind and the sound of gravel crunching under tires. Then Walter veered down a narrow dirt path, almost more of a trail, that snaked behind the crumbling warehouse blocks. Jack turned off his lights, eased up on the gas. Past some overgrown shrubs, he saw it. A sagging garage with holes in the tin roof, a warped wooden door, and no visible lock. Walter parked right at the entrance. The engine stopped, but the interior light stayed on, just enough for Jack to see him lift a small paper bag and a sack of cat litter. He pushed the door open with his shoulder. The wood groaned like a weary breath. Inside, the space was barely larger than Jack's kitchen. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, powered by a battery on the floor. There was a fold-out steel bed, a thin mattress, a chipped mini-electric stove, a plastic basin doubling as a sink, and several plastic bags neatly holding folded clothes. In the corner was Whiskey, the scruffy gray cat, sitting patiently, as if it had heard the engine from a mile away. It rushed toward Walter and rubbed against his damp pant leg. Walter smiled faintly, poured water into a bowl, then sat at a wobbly folding table, opened a can of tuna, and split it. Half for himself, half for Whiskey. Jack couldn't hear anything, only saw the scene. But he knew this was Walter's only dinner. Wind pushed through gaps in the metal roof, carrying dust and dry leaves, swaying the faded curtain over the garage window. Jack stayed in his car. He didn't dare move, not out of fear, out of shame. He was the man who built a restaurant empire from nothing, the same man who once told a journalist, "I want my employees to feel like this is home." And yet, in the shadow of that very empire, someone like Walter lived like this, unthanked, unprotected, and above all, unrespected. Jack thought of the $2 million advertising deal he'd signed just last week and contrasted it with the cost of a water heater that Walter clearly didn't have. When Walter stood up to fetch a blanket, Jack noticed a small wooden photo frame sitting carefully on the table. Inside was a picture of Walter and an elderly woman with silver hair, Marianne without a doubt. The photo had faded with time, but her smile remained soft. Beneath the frame was an opened envelope. Inside it, an invoice from St. Matthew Hospital, likely Marianne's final bill. Beside the frame sat a handwritten journal, where Walter had likely been writing brief entries each day. Jack couldn't read the words from where he sat, but he could guess. Walter still used an old-fashioned fountain pen, and the handwriting of a former engineer was unmistakable, neat, disciplined, and steady. Each night, Walter must have written what he had done, who he had helped, and, perhaps, what no one knew he had given up. Jack leaned his head against the steering wheel. Outside, a soft rain began to fall. He felt his own tears welling, blending with the drops tapping against the windshield. Not because of the tragedy, but because of a rare kind of strength, one this society often overlooks. He couldn't change Walter's past, but Jack knew what he had to do next. Tomorrow morning he would meet someone who knew more about Walter, Mr. Glenn. And Jack understood. Exposing the truth wasn't just about evidence. It was about knowing the person behind it all. But tonight, he stayed a little longer. In the car, in silence. Outside, the rain fell steadily, and inside that tiny garage, an old man, who had just washed hundreds of dishes without a word of thanks, placed his hand on the photo of his late wife and whispered something so soft, only he and Whiskey could hear it. Tuesday. The skies over Austin were heavy and gray. The clouds looked like sandpaper, thin but weighty. Jack Donovan left his hotel at 6:45 a.m., not with the air of a CEO inspecting a branch, but as a soldier preparing for battle, quiet, calculated, and with no room for failure. No suit, just the same weathered cap, flannel shirt, and wrinkled jeans. But hidden beneath his jacket was a new recording device, clipped to his lapel like any ordinary pin. Jack wasn't relying on just one audio file. He wanted proof so irrefutable, not even the most stubborn skeptic could deny it. When he entered the Junction Grill, the diner hadn't opened yet, but a few staff had already arrived. Walter was the first, just like every day. Jack observed him from a distance, a slight lean in his step, canvas bag in one hand, a box of cat food in the other, something others might laugh at, but to Jack, it was a quiet reminder that kindness always finds a place to rest. Chelsea and Zane arrived not long after, whispering and giggling. Their eyes were the same as yesterday, cunning, confident, and completely unaware that the quiet man in the corner didn't just hold a coffee cup, he held their fate. Then, like a scene from a well-rehearsed play, the plan kicked off. Zane made his way to the register earlier than usual. He didn't appear busy, just loitered near the till, pretending to sort receipts, occasionally letting a small bill slip into his shirt pocket. The motions were light, discreet, but Jack, watching from his familiar corner, saw everything. Chelsea wasn't far behind in her craft. She kept voiding transactions after customers left, making the sales disappear from the system, while the cash still found a home. Somewhere only she knew. Ben, the young cook, furrowed his brow after noticing Chelsea cancel a transaction for the third time that morning. He said nothing, but Jack knew. Some young people still knew right from wrong, even when caught between two opposing forces. Around 10:30 a.m., the target appeared. A young mother, fair skin, brown hair in a bun, walked in carrying her 5-year-old daughter. Her name was Tanya Rivera, a waitress at a small diner in East Austin, working nights and cleaning in the mornings. Jack had connected with her through a single mother support network. She wasn't acting, because what she was about to portray was her own story. They picked a table near the register and ordered something simple: grilled cheese and vegetable soup. Luna, the little girl, ate happily, savoring every bite like it was the best meal of her life. No one in the diner knew this was the start of a war. When Tanya approached the register, Jack saw Chelsea squint. She recognized the setup. Everything was going to plan. "I'm sorry, I thought I had enough," Tanya said, voice thread-thin. "The bill's $17, but I only have 5. I'm not sure if my card will work. The bank's been acting up." Luna held her mother's hand, eyes glancing around, unsure. Chelsea raised an eyebrow and said loudly with feigned sympathy, "Oh no, another one short on cash? I guess Walter's kindness fund is back in business. Walter, someone needs saving again." Heads turned. A few customers looked up. Some frowned. But most stayed silent. Silent out of confusion. Silent because they'd seen it before. Walter stepped out from the kitchen, still holding a rag. He saw Tanya, saw Luna, and understood instantly. Without a word, he pulled out his wallet and handed Chelsea 2 $10 bills. "Keep the change. Get the little girl something she'll enjoy." Tanya fought back tears, remembering Jack's instructions, not to overact, not to overthink. She nodded and said just enough to make it believable. "Thank you. I'll pay it back next week, when I get paid." Walter smiled gently. "You don't owe me anything." Luna tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, who is that man?" Walter leaned down, tapped her hair softly. I'm the dishwasher. From across the room, Zane whispered to Chelsea. Perfect. That's the 17 we needed. Chelsea smirked. Patricia won't suspect a thing. Fits the pattern like textbook. Jack turned to Ben and asked quietly, Did you see that? Ben nodded slowly. I saw more than enough. Later that afternoon, Patricia, the store manager, checked the register. Her face darkened. We're short $98 over the past 3 days, she said sharply. I'll have to report this to corporate. Zane jumped in. I'm not trying to accuse anyone, but it's weird. Every time the till's short, Walter's always nearby. Chelsea added, Yeah, I've noticed that too. Patricia turned to look at Walter, still wiping counters in the back. His hands were red and swollen, his back more hunched than usual. But he was tidy, focused, and completely unaware. I'll need to investigate further. But if that's true, Patricia hesitated, he'll be terminated immediately. We don't have cameras to verify anything. Jack couldn't stay silent any longer. He stood, paid his bill, and exited through the back door. The moment it clicked shut, he pulled out his phone and made the call. I need the legal team ready, Jack said, his voice low and firm. I'm sending over the recordings this afternoon, and tomorrow, we'll do what Justice 2 often forgets to do. Clear a man's name and act. Jack Donovan didn't return to his hotel after leaving the Junction Grill that afternoon. Instead, he drove toward Westfield, a quiet residential area in the city's north side, where the maple trees had just begun to turn red, and small wooden houses whispered of an era when people still sat on porches with tea and traded stories with neighbors. His car came to a stop in front of a house with ivy trailing down its porch posts and a wooden swing dangling gently from the eaves. An old man sat there, holding a cup of tea, his eyes locked on the pages of a well-worn book. Its maroon leather cover read, Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl. Mr. Glenn, Jack called softly. The man looked up, squinted, then smiled. I figured. You're not a regular. Jack returned the smile and approached. How'd you know? Only someone who's been responsible for others can sit that still without checking their phone or grumbling about slow food. And only the owner stares at the dish pit longer than the menu. They both chuckled, a small, knowing laugh. Mind if I borrow a bit of your time? Jack asked, settling into the chair across from him. Glenn nodded. As long as you tell me why? Jack looked down at the tea table, then straight into Glenn's eyes. I need to know about Walter Brooks, everything. Before I do something big tomorrow, I need to be sure I truly understand the man I'm about to stand up for. Glenn set the book down. A breeze rustled through like a hand on the shoulder. Walter, Glenn began, isn't the kind of man who lives to be noticed. But he's exactly the kind of man whose absence leaves a hole in a whole community. Jack listened closely, his eyes never leaving the old man. I've known him since the first day he came to the junction asking for work. Marianne had just passed. He wasn't looking for a handout. He wanted a job, said, I don't want to sit still. I want to feel useful. Jack nodded slowly. Glenn continued. Back then, Patricia, the manager, was hesitant. Who hires a 70-year-old to wash dishes? But Walter said one sentence that made her sign him on the spot. I'm not asking for a chance. I'm offering a deal. I give it my all, and no one has to carry me. He kept his word? Jack asked. He went beyond it. Glenn rested his hands on the table. The breeze made the tea ripple. Walter used to be an engineer. He lived on Maple Street, the house once featured in the local paper as having the most beautiful autumn garden in town. But cancer doesn't choose houses. It chooses people. And Marianne, she was its choice. Jack sat in silence. They sold the house, the car, everything, so she could spend her final 8 months in the best care facility. Walter never regretted it. You know what he called those 8 months? Jack shook his head. The last honeymoon. Every day he'd visit her, read books, tell stories, write down everything she said. Every night he went home alone and wrote in his journal. Jack's gaze drifted off. For the first time in years, he felt words fail him. After she passed, Walter kept sending money to the hospital. Not because he had to, but because he'd promised her, no one else will bear this debt but me. What about his daughter? Jack asked. Erica lives in Denver. She's a psychologist. Doesn't know her father's broke. Walter sends her photos taken at the diner, pretending he's a morning shift manager. Told me once, I want her to be proud, not pity me. Jack bowed his head. One time I asked why he didn't move in with her. He said I'd be a shadow in that house. But here, I'm a small light for a few people who need it. That's enough. The trees rustled again. Leaves whispered. Jack asked softly, Do you know anything about Chelsea and Zane? Glenn raised an eyebrow. Heard some things from staff. Cutting corners, dodging responsibility, talking behind backs. Walter knew, but he never tattled. Just said, You don't teach kindness by shouting. Do you think Walter could have taken money from the till? Glenn tapped the table lightly. You kidding me? Walter tapes his coin pouch shut so it doesn't wear out. If a customer overpays, he covers the change from his own wallet. A man like that? Steal? Number not in a million years. Jack exhaled deeply. Thank you. Glenn looked at him, his eyes old but sharp. So what are you going to do? Jack stood, gazing back toward the Junction Grill. Tomorrow I'm going to remind this company, and maybe the world, that it's not the best who keep us standing. It's the kindest. Glenn smiled. Then you'd better do it fast, before someone like Walter gets hurt by people who never deserve to touch him. That afternoon, Jack didn't return to the office. He went straight to the company's legal team, handed over the recordings, and requested official transcriptions with legal certification. He called the security firm, the new surveillance system installed 2 days ago at the Junction. He had it activated to pull full footage. Then he contacted the community group that had introduced him to Tanya, asking to begin work on a new support fund. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He sat alone in his room, staring at Walter's employee file. At a handwritten letter Walter had submitted to HR 5 years ago. I'm not asking for much, just a place where I can still feel useful. Jack read it 3 times. On the 4th, he picked up a pen and wrote beneath it, You weren't just useful, you are the standard. Tomorrow would come quickly, and with it, a truth the city, and maybe the whole online world, needed to see for themselves. Wednesday, the reckoning day. Jack Donovan arrived early, still undercover, still seated at the far end of the counter beneath the old leather map of Texas. But this time, in his pocket were 2 miniature cameras, a backup audio recorder, and a meticulously crafted plan. On the way to the diner, he had stopped 3 times. Once to call HR, requesting a full audit of complaint records tied to the Junction. Once to check in with the charity organization prepared to support Walter if things went public. And once, just to breathe. Because today wasn't just about Walter, it was about the true soul of the system Jack had built. Walter arrived as usual, canvas bag and a box of cat food in hand. His eyes looked more tired than the day before, but still bright. Something in him seemed to sense it, that a strange wind had shifted in the old kitchen. Chelsea showed up early, for once. So did Zane, both dressed neatly, hair tidy, nothing out of place. But their eyes, especially Zane's, held a gleam of anticipation, calculation. Patricia, the store manager, walked in at 9:15, later than usual. She looked tense. In her hands, printed POS reports and hand-scribbled transaction logs. We're doing a surprise audit today, she announced. The chain owner is demanding a precise report, down to the last cent. Chelsea leaned toward Zane and whispered, just loud enough for Jack to hear. Perfect. Showtime. Around 10:10, the scene began. A middle-aged man, Terry, a known regular, stepped up to the counter. He looked sheepish. My card got declined. I thought I had money in the account, he muttered. Chelsea responded, loud and clear, without hesitation. Mr. Walter, looks like someone needs your kindness insurance again. Walter stepped out from the back. No questions, no judgment. Just reached into his wallet and placed a $20 bill on the counter. Lunch is on me today. Terry hesitated. I'll pay you back Friday, I promise. Walter smiled softly, then turned to walk away, not knowing the trap had just snapped shut. At 10:25, Patricia was reviewing the logs when Zane approached, feigning concern. Boss, we're short again. Register 2's off by about $20. I'm not pointing fingers, but Walter was standing right there a minute ago. Chelsea chimed in. Yeah, I saw that too. I stepped away to wash up and he was near the drawer. I'm not accusing, but it's pretty convenient. Patricia frowned. That's the third time. I'll double check. She scanned the page, eyes narrowing. Jack clenched his coffee cup. The trap was complete. Only the final blow remained. At 11 o'clock, the lunch crowd returned. A young mother walked in. Amy, the same woman Walter had helped earlier in the week. She had 3 kids in tow, all smiling. But Amy's expression held unease. She was still short on funds. And just as expected, Chelsea noticed. No need to check your wallet, Chelsea said loudly. I'm sure Mr. Walter will step in again. He loves doing that. Murmurs rippled through the room. Eyes turned toward Walter, who now stood frozen behind the kitchen line. Amy flushed. She hadn't expected this to be public. She whispered, Can I cover the rest with tips? Chelsea smirked. We don't do IOUs on kindness, unless Walter's planning to donate again. Walter stepped forward, quiet, reached into his wallet again. No eye contact, no words. That was the cue. Zane turned to Patricia. Another coincidence. Short on cash, and there he is. You see it, right? Patricia's lips tightened. Her hands trembled slightly. She turned to Walter. Walter, I need to speak with you. Now. Jack set down his cup, stood, walked quietly out the back door. He pressed a button on his phone. I need comms, legal regional management. The recordings are sent. Security footage is rolling. I'm going back in now. Make sure everyone's present by 11:30. The voice on the other end confirmed. Jack exhaled. Before stepping back in for the final act, he turned and looked at the diner from outside. Walter standing in front of Patricia, flanked by Chelsea and Zane, like a man being led to judgment for a crime he didn't understand. It's time, Jack whispered. If you believe truth matters, even when it walks quietly in an apron, don't miss what comes next. Like, share, and subscribe so more people hear stories that need to be heard. Patricia, the shift manager, stood behind the register, her face tight with nerves, hands trembling as she gripped her notebook. Chelsea stood smugly by her side, arms crossed, with the false concern of someone pretending to care about protocol. Zane stood nearby, sighing theatrically as if about to deliver unfortunate news. In front of them stood Walter Brooks, the same man who, just minutes earlier, had been washing dishes in the kitchen. Now he stood there, back slightly hunched, swollen hands gently gripping a worn-out wallet. His eyes searched for an anchor in a storm of accusations that hadn't yet been spoken, but were already loud in the silence. Walter, Patricia began, voice unsteady. I need to ask you something. It seems like every time the register comes up short, you've been nearby. Walter said nothing. Chelsea cleared her throat. Zane glanced at Patricia as if prompting her to continue. Patricia added, No one's accusing you, but there have been witnesses, observations, and if it happened again today, then... Walter finally spoke. His voice was low, raspy, but steady. You think I took the money? No one answered. I just helped a few customers who didn't have enough. They were embarrassed. They didn't want to say it out loud. I didn't want them to be humiliated. That's all. Zane interjected, his tone laced with fake compassion. Walter, you're a good man, but the fact is, the money's still missing, and with the cameras down, we can't run on trust forever. Chelsea added, I mean, on a dishwasher's salary, you've been helping people every week? No one's going to believe that. Walter looked at them both. His eyes weren't angry, just sad. The sadness of someone losing a battle in a game rigged from the start. I haven't taken a penny from anyone, he said. If I'm guilty of anything, it's not being able to look away when someone needed help. Patricia exhaled. Walter, company policy says if the register comes up short 3 times without reasonable explanation, I have to suspend you for investigation. Walter bowed his head. I understand, Zane smirked. I'll help you pack your things. No need to make a scene. No need for that. The voice came from the back of the room, deep, clear, and ringing like a church bell. Everyone turned. Chelsea and Zane froze. Patricia's jaw dropped. Jack Donovan stepped forward. No cap, no flannel shirt. He wore a crisp white button-down tucked into slacks. His silver-streaked hair was neatly combed. And his eyes of a man who had seen more than any boardroom or balance sheet could reveal, were blazing with clarity. Patricia stammered. Mr. Donovan? Jack nodded. Good morning. No one spoke. No one dared. What a coincidence, Jack continued, walking slowly to the center of the room, that I returned to my very first store after years away, and this is what I find. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. I didn't come here as a CEO. I came here as a customer, as a man trying to understand why a place that once made me proud now shows declining profits, high turnover, and crashing morale. Zane forced a smile. Probably just a temporary hiccup. Jack raised a hand. Quiet. It's my turn now. The entire diner fell silent. Staff stopped moving. Customers stood, sensing something serious was unfolding. I've recorded everything. And this week, we also reinstalled the security system, one with audio capture, hidden, so no one had a chance to rehearse. What I heard over the last 3 nights kept me awake. Jack pulled out his phone and synced it to the TV screen mounted in the corner. The footage rolled. Chelsea voiding transactions, Zane pocketing bills, the two of them plotting to frame Walter exactly when the till came up short. Crystal clear. Undeniable. And this, Jack said, switching clips, is Walter. Standing near the register, not to steal, but to help. Every time a customer came up short, he pulled money from his own wallet and laid it down. No one asked. No one saw. He helped, and then quietly went back to washing dishes. The room was still. Zane stuttered. No, that's not what it looks like. Just a misunderstanding. Be quiet, Jack said, calm but with enough force to silence the room. A misunderstanding? Then explain this. He played the final clip, Chelsea mocking Walter, Zane saying they just needed a few more dollars to push him out. Then came the laughter, that cruel, satisfied laughter. Customers began to murmur. Some walked toward Walter. A woman said, "You paid for my meal when I lost my wallet. I never forgot that." Another added, "You're the reason I come here every week." Jack turned to Patricia. "Do you have anything to say?" Patricia choked up. "I didn't know. I didn't think it would go this far." Jack nodded. "You're not the only one. I didn't know either. And that's my failure." He turned to Walter, still standing still, his fingers loosely gripping the edge of his apron. "Walter," Jack said, voice softening, "I owe you an apology, not just for today, but for every day you've given more than anyone else here, and never got recognition for it." Walter looked up, not angry, just peaceful. "I don't need an apology," he said. "I just hope no one else gets treated like I was." Jack nodded, pulled out an envelope. "Then let this be more than an apology." He looked around the room. "Chelsea, Zane, you're both fired, effective immediately. Our legal team will coordinate with the police on charges of theft, defamation, and conspiracy to defraud." Zane shouted, "You can't do this! We have rights!" Jack's voice was cool. "You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it. The cameras record audio too." Zane turned to bolt, but 2 security guards stepped in. Chelsea collapsed into a chair, sobbing. No one went to her, not one person. Jack scanned the room. This isn't just a restaurant. This is home. And in a home, we don't judge people because they don't look rich. In a home, we don't blame the one person still holding on to kindness. In a home, when someone's done wrong, they're held accountable. He turned back to Walter. "And you, Mr. Brooks, if you'll allow me, I'd like to invite you to the office to talk about something more fitting for the 7 silent years you gave this place." Walter paused, took a deep breath, then nodded. And as they walked together, customers, those eating, those watching, those who were once invisible, stood and clapped. Not for the CEO, but for the dishwasher, for kindness without a microphone, and for justice, finally finding its voice. As Jack Donovan led Walter Brooks into the back office of the Junction Grill, the entire diner remained frozen in a strange, reverent silence. Though Chelsea had been escorted out in tears, and Zane handcuffed quietly by internal security. No one in the diner moved. No one reached for their phones. No one spoke. They simply stood and clapped. At first it was a scattered applause, an emotional reflex delayed by the weight of everything that had just unfolded. But then, as Walter turned back briefly, gripping the chair's edge to steady himself, the clapping grew louder, deeper, more real than any ovation the diner had ever known. Inside the office, Jack closed the door behind them and poured a glass of water, placing it gently in front of Walter. "Please," he said softly, "have a seat." Walter nodded and sat in the old fabric-covered chair, the same one he used to dust off every morning in the hallway, unasked, unnoticed. Jack sat across from him. No contracts, no legal language, no branding. "Walter," Jack began, "I want to speak to you man to man. Not CEO to employee, not boss to dishwasher, just one man relearning a lesson he once thought he taught, from someone who never asked for a stage." Walter looked at him. "You don't need to apologize." "But I want to," Jack said. "I let you live in a leaking garage, in isolation, inside a system I built, but had lost its soul, and I didn't even know, until it was almost too late." Walter stayed quiet. Jack slowly pulled a thin file from the drawer. It wasn't thick like a contract. It wasn't colorful like a marketing brochure. Just a handwritten proposal in plain black ink. The name at the top, Walter Brooks. "This is an offer," Jack said. "I'd like to appoint you as coordination manager here at the Junction Grill. Not for the title, but because I need someone in that seat who can rebuild the culture this place forgot." Walter blinked. I've never managed anyone before." Jack smiled gently. "And I've never washed dishes by hand for 7 years straight without a single day off or a single complaint." Walter scanned the file. "Triple the pay, with health insurance, full coverage, dental, vision, emergency care." Walter lowered his head. "I don't want special treatment." Jack leaned forward. "This isn't special treatment. It's recognition. And if you turn it down, I'll feel like the one person in this place with integrity is being kept at the bottom by his own humility." Walter smiled, a soft, genuine smile. "I accept, but on one condition." "What's that?" Walter spoke slowly. "Don't fire the young ones just because they made mistakes. Train them. Give them a chance to see a new model, where kindness isn't weakness." Jack nodded. "Except for Zane and Chelsea?" Walter nodded quietly. "And the house?" Jack asked. Walter raised an eyebrow. "The house?" Jack pulled another envelope from his coat, placed it on the table. "A key, a small home, just 3 blocks from here. 2 bedrooms, a balcony, a place for your cat, and a roof that doesn't leak." Walter went still. "It's not a gift," Jack said. "It's what you earned for 7 years of paying off debts you didn't owe." Walter opened the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of a property deed, with his name clearly listed. "A place where you can live the way you deserve, where no one sees you curled up in a cold garage, where no one laughs at you for carrying a box of cat food to work." Walter clutched the paper, eyes misting over. I don't know what to say." Jack rose slowly and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Just keep living the way you always have. That's more than enough." When they stepped out of the office together, the entire diner stood again. Ben was the first to rush forward. He hugged Walter tightly, then pulled a crumpled slip of paper from his pocket. "I kept this," he said. "That quote you wrote, 'No one ever regrets being kind.' That day I was going to quit. That note stopped me." Walter looked at it, his hand trembling. "You really kept it?" Ben nodded. Then came Amy, the single mother, with her kids. "We have something," she said, pulling out a worn envelope. "It's from people you helped. Some gave $5, some gave 1, but they all wanted to say thank you." Jack looked at Walter, then raised his hand. "We don't need the money anymore," he said, "but we need something else." He turned to Patricia. "I want to start the Walter Brooks Fund, an internal emergency support fund for any staff member in sudden hardship. No forms, no red tape, just trust." The room applauded again, not from admiration, but from having just witnessed the rebirth of something deeply moral. That afternoon, Walter walked from table to table, Not as the dishwasher, but as someone people now called by name, someone who was greeted, hugged, and seen by people who once moved around him like air. And when Jack finally stepped out of the diner at the end of the day, he paused. Pinned to the staff bulletin board was a new note, handwritten, neat, in blue ink. Kindness won't change the world in a day, but it's always the first thing that changes a person. Walter Brooks. The next morning, Austin's skies were unusually clear. The sunlight was soft, as if it too understood that today wasn't just another morning. For Walter Brooks, or for a small community that had grown used to ignoring quiet acts of kindness. Walter arrived at the Junction Grill at 6:58 a.m., 2 minutes early like always. But this time, he didn't enter through the back door. He didn't wear an apron. He didn't carry his old gear bag. He wore a crisp white shirt, neatly pressed khaki pants, and on his wrist, replacing the usual gauze, was a brand new watch. Jack Donovan was already waiting. "Where are we going?" Walter asked, voice low, cautious. Jack smiled. "To check out your new place." Walter frowned. "But I haven't signed anything." "You don't need to. Everything's done. Today, I just want to see you walk into a place you deserve to call home." Jack's SUV turned down a quiet street shaded by tall oaks. Kids' bicycles leaned against white picket fences. The scent of fresh-cut grass floated in the air. Birds chirped nearby. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that resembled the leaking garage behind an industrial park where Walter had spent his nights. They stopped in front of a small house. Pale gray-blue walls, white wooden shutters, hanging flower baskets on the second-floor balcony. Not luxurious, but warm, tidy, and most importantly, it opened like it had been waiting for someone to return. Jack handed Walter the keys. "We fixed the roof, soundproofed the walls, installed a new heating system, the back rooms for the cat." Walter walked slowly toward the door, hand trembling. When he pushed it open, a gentle scent of new wood, soap, and fresh paint greeted him. Inside, a small sofa set, a spotless electric stove, a round dining table by the window. On that table sat a simple, handwritten card. "Welcome home, Walter. From those who owe you more than a meal." Walter said nothing. He stepped through slowly, as if afraid the house would vanish if he moved too fast. With each room he passed, his eyes grew redder, but he kept it in, until he reached the hallway. There, hanging neatly at eye level, was a framed photo of Marianne, his late wife. It was a larger print of the picture Jack had seen in the old garage, now placed with dignity in a wooden frame. Beneath the frame, a small inscription. "Love doesn't end. It just changes form." Walter stood still for a long time. Jack spoke gently. "I called your daughter, Erica. I'm sorry I didn't ask first, but I thought she needed to know." Walter turned, startled. She doesn't know anything." "She does now, and she's waiting." A knock echoed at the door. Walter didn't move. The door opened. A woman in her 30s stepped in. Soft curls, round glasses, a bouquet of white daisies in one hand, and in the other, a photo of a little girl on horseback, holding a burger, with Walter in the background, smiling wide as summer. "I've been looking for you, Dad," Erica said, voice trembling. Walter stepped back. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to be a burden." Erica moved forward and embraced him. "You were never a burden. I just wanted to know you were okay. Now I do, and I've never been prouder." Walter couldn't hold back the tears anymore. He hugged her back, shoulders shaking like a man finally releasing a weight too long, carried in silence. An hour later, they sat together on the small living room couch. Jack handed Walter another envelope. Inside, a letter from St. Matthew Hospital confirming payment. "All outstanding debts for patient Marianne Brooks have been fully paid. The account is closed. All interest charges have been waived. Please accept our belated condolences and gratitude for your enduring strength." Walter read each line carefully. His hand clenched the page, but not in anger, in release. How did you do this?" Jack smiled. "With the profits from the restaurant chain you helped keep running for 7 years, without anyone noticing. Today, justice finally belongs to you." Walter sat in stunned silence. "And one last thing," Jack added. We've begun rolling out an emergency support policy across the company. We're calling it the Brooks Initiative. Walter chuckled, for the first time freely. Then I'd better stick around long enough to see some of these kids learn what kindness really means. Jack nodded. No need to wait. Tomorrow you'll already start seeing it. That afternoon, as Jack left, he looked up and saw Walter standing on the second-floor balcony with Erica and his cat Whiskey playfully pawing at a new planter. The sun cast its glow across the roof tiles, bathing the house in a light that felt like a silent blessing. A man who once slept beside storm drains now sat in the sun, listening to his daughter's voice, owing nothing to anyone anymore. No one could return Walter's lost years, but Jack, in an entire community, had given him something greater. The unshakable proof that kindness is never wasted. 3 days after Walter Brooks was cleared of wrongdoing and returned to the Junction Grill, not as a dishwasher, but as an honorary coordination manager, everything began to shift. Not just at the East Side branch, but across the entire Junction Grill network. Not through press conferences, not through banners or slogans, but through action, quiet, firm, and uncompromising. The headquarters of the Junction Grill stood in a modest glass building in downtown Austin. That morning at 7 a.m. sharp, the lights were on at the 10th floor's largest conference room. All regional managers, department heads of HR, training, marketing, and finance were present. In the center stood Jack Donovan, gray suit, pale blue shirt, no tie. His voice was steady and warm. Not the cold edge of a CEO, but the humility of a man who had witnessed something powerful enough to reshape every decision he thought he understood. Last week, he began, I visited our very first store as a silent customer. No announcement, no name tag, no titles. The room fell still. And there I saw something we've long since lost. He played security footage. Walter quietly pulling money from his wallet to help a struggling customer. Zane and Chelsea plotting the setup. Customers rising to their feet and applauding as Walter was vindicated. No one spoke, but a few eyes turned red. Jack continued. We built this company on one value, kindness like home. But as we scaled, optimized, and trimmed expenses, we forgot that if no one lives by that value, it's just a slogan. He turned and pointed to the next slide. The Brooks Initiative, Redefining Humanity in Business. A 7-point plan appeared on screen. 1. Living wage for every employee across the system, regardless of position. 2. Emergency internal fund for medical, housing, or personal crises. No red tape. 3rd, training in compassion-based culture, using Walter's story as a real-life case study. 4th, no blame policy. Employees can report concerns without fear of termination. 5th Walter Brooks Day, November 10th each year. Every location honors one quietly kind employee. 6. Scholarships for employees' children, named after Marianne Brooks. 7. Zero tolerance for manipulation or entrapment. First offense, termination. No negotiation. No one pushed back. A single clap came from the far end of the room, then another, until the applause spread. Jack bowed slightly. We don't need more Walters. We just need to stop breaking the ones we already have. That same day, the Austin Herald ran a front-page headline, The Dishwasher Who Quietly Saved an Entire System and Became a Symbol of Ethics. Walter Brooks, 76, a former engineer, widower, once living in a garage, had reshaped the culture of one of Texas's largest restaurant chains, using nothing but patience and kindness no one ever asked him to give. Online, footage from the Junction Grill was shared hundreds of times with captions like, I cried when he simply said, I just wanted to help someone in need. This is why dignity should be protected over profit. Someone tell me where to send a thank you letter to Walter Brooks. The hashtag #BeLikeWalter quickly trended statewide. At the East Side Diner, it was Friday, busiest day of the week, but no one shouted about late orders. No one slammed a fist on the counter. Ben, the young cook, wore a pin on his apron. Kindness isn't extra, it's the foundation. Walter Brooks' Patricia, the same manager who once didn't know how to defend Walter, now led the rollout of the new training initiative titled Trust-Based Communication. She voluntarily canceled 2 weeks of scheduled vacation to personally oversee its launch. Walter sat at the counter's corner table next to his daughter Erica, who had taken a leave of absence from her job to stay in Austin for a few months. In his hands, not a job application, but a proposal on how to improve dishwashing ergonomics for aging staff. Jack walked over. "Ready?" Walter smiled. "I've never been ready, but I've always shown up." Within a week, the Brooks Initiative rolled out at 5 pilot locations. Within a month, it went system-wide. Within a year, it became a model adopted by other restaurant chains nationwide. Articles about Walter appeared in business journals, corporate ethics forums, and even the inspiration section of Time magazine's December issue. When asked for comment, Walter simply said, "I didn't try to change anything. I just didn't want anyone else to feel like a burden, because I know what that feels like." That evening, Jack returned to the small house on Grove Street, now officially called Walter's home. The porch light was on. Inside, laughter echoed, Erica's voice mingling with the soft meow of whiskey. At the front door, a newly installed wooden plaque read, "Home of the dishwasher who taught an entire system how to be human." Jack stood there a moment, taking it in, then turned toward his car. Tomorrow he would write a letter to every employee. "We once chased profit, KPIs, and quarterly goals. But then a quiet man showed us something simpler. When kindness is your standard, no one has to stand guard over justice." Sunday morning. The skies over Austin were clear, fresh from a gentle night rain. That rain had come like a farewell, washing away the last bitterness that lingered from darker days. In the kitchen of the little house on Grove Street, Walter Brooks was making tea. He poured the boiling water into the pot, swirled it gently, then waited patiently, reverently, as if the act itself preserved something sacred about kindness. In the corner, Whiskey the cat stretched lazily on the windowsill, her silver fur glowing under the morning sun. Erica, his daughter, folded a blanket nearby as soft classical music played from a small radio. The house had nothing extravagant, but it had peace, and it had enough. Outside, a small van with the logo Junction Outreach pulled up to the curb. Ben, the young cook, stepped out, accompanied by 2 new hires from the Second Chance program Walter had helped create. They wore clean new uniforms, faces glowing, each holding a wooden name tag, hand-carved by Walter himself in what used to be his garage, now converted into a small community workshop. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," Ben called out cheerfully. Walter opened the door and smiled. That kind of smile that makes you feel welcome without needing words. He handed each of them a lunchbox. "Don't eat too fast," he joked, "or you'll miss the flavor that only comes at the start." No one laughed out loud, but everyone smiled, because sincerity is a seasoning that doesn't need stirring. At the newly opened Junction location in Riverside, Walter arrived as the guest of honor. There was no red carpet, no professional MC, just a wooden sign above the front door. Walter Brooks Hall, named for the man who taught us that kindness needs no GPA. Jack Donovan stood nearby. No long speeches. He simply said, "Today we're not cutting a ribbon on a new restaurant. We're opening a new culture where everyone has the right to be treated with dignity. And we know it works because Walter lived that way quietly for 7 years without waiting for anyone's permission." Walter stepped forward, holding a badge that read, "Mentor, the one who guides." He took the mic, but only spoke a few lines. "I used to think that if I ever fell one day, no one would remember. But it turns out, if even one person stops to see you, everything can change. I'm not a big figure. I was just the guy who washed dishes and tried to keep my conscience as clean as the plates I scrubbed." The room rose to its feet. No cheers, no confetti, only reverent silence. And once more applause. Longer, deeper, truer than ever before. That evening, back in his small home, Walter sat on the balcony, whiskey curled at his feet. The night breeze was gentle. At his feet lay a handwritten note, soft script, gently creased. "Dad, you're my hero. No one else needs to say it. I've always known. I love you. Erica." Next to the letter was a fresh journal. He opened to the first page and wrote, "Day 1 of a new kind of system, not made of tech, but of conscience." He smiled, took a sip of tea. The traffic hummed in the distance, streetlights softened, and inside his chest, no more shame, no more regret, only peace. And so, the story of an old dishwasher, a CEO who lost his way, and a company that nearly lost its soul, became the quiet symbol of something simple, yet lasting. Respect doesn't need permission. Kindness doesn't need a megaphone. And justice sometimes begins with just one person who refuses to give up. The dishwasher's dignity, a story of quiet goodness, reclaimed justice, and a legacy that echoes beyond applause. Walter Brooks never asked to be honored. He only wanted to live kindly, without suspicion. And because a man like that asked for nothing, we owe him everything. Have you ever met someone like Walter? Quiet, kind, and overlooked? Share their story in the comments below, because sometimes just retelling their name might be enough to save them from being forgotten. And if you've ever doubted that justice still exists, remember, sometimes all it takes is one person to stand up, and the entire system has to change. If you believe kindness is the greatest strength, hit like. If you want to help spread stories like this one, subscribe. And if you've ever been a Walter or were saved by one, tell us. We're listening. Because the world isn't short on talent. The world is short on people brave enough to stay kind to the very end.